The United States makes the UN work when it wants it to work. And that is exactly the way it should be, because the only question for the United States is what's in our national interest.
My name is John, and the International Criminal Court is now in session. It is October 20th, 2025, and once again we are going to look at the situation within Ukraine. So let's start. First of all, we are going to look at the Kherson direction. There have been a lot of conflicting reports as of late about a Russian operation within the city of Kherson, like literally within its administrative borders. There were conflicting reports that Russian DRGs were able to cross the Dnieper River here and enter these villages here, but we don't really have enough evidence to show that. However, it does seem kind of clear that the Russians did cross the river and enter these islands here. And apparently Russians got as far as here before folding back. Now, they look to gain control of this neighborhood first, before going into Kherson City proper. Now, for further context, the Russians once controlled the city of Kherson from March 2022 to November 2022, when until the Ukrainians managed to retake the city as a result of a successful counteroffensive, which has left them in control of this arguably ghastly-looking city now. I mean, literally, there's little to nobody on the streets of Kherson. Like, nobody. They've either have fled for other parts of Ukraine, fled the country as a whole, or maybe have fled into the Russian-occupied areas within Ukraine as well. But yeah, so far, not much evidence to support the claims of such a river crossing. But considering the timing and the season that is, I'd keep an eye on this direction just in case, but I would urge strong caution when observing the Kherson area. Now, next up, we're going to talk a bit about the Zaporizhzhia direction. Apparently, Russians are continuing to contest for the town of Stepnogorsk and Primorsk, but that's about it. There are reports, however, of an apparent Russian breakthrough in the direction of the large village of Mala Tokmachka. And they got as far as the center here, like within this area. There are videos from the Ukrainians that they have been able to apparently repel the assault and take out many of the vehicles. But what we don't know is if there's like any Russian infantry that may have lost their lives or got injured during this said assault. That we don't know. But apparently it seems to me that the Russians are trying to pressure the Orkiv area in order to get the Ukrainians to divert their resources away from Guleipol, which itself is going to probably come under Russian control within the next few months if the defenses there are not able to stabilize the situation. But yeah, it does not look good for the Ukrainians in Orkiv in the long term, but in the short term, I think they'll be able to hold the town, at least for a while. But I don't think long term. Now, as for the eastern Zaporizhzhia / Dnieper-Pokrovsk direction, or Guleipol direction, that is, which also would include the town of Pokrovsk, the Russians have continued their advance towards the town of Guleipol, and they have been able to consolidate full control over the village of Poltavka, and also seizing control over the village of Novomy Khalivka, not to be confused with another village within Donetsk region. The Russians were also able to advance a little further into the Dnieper-Petrovsk region, taking partial control over the village of Zlahoda. But that's about it for now. What I am expecting, by the way, to happen next is that the Russians are going to try to take these series of villages here before they move further west towards the town of Guleipol. And if you ask me, I think this town's days are numbered. But the big question, though, is will the Russians advance north towards Pokrovsk? Time will tell. But I think the odds are in their favor. in the Udachny/Dnipropetrovsk direction, the Russians have seized complete control over the village of Molodetsky. Molodetsky is right next to the border with Dnipropetrovsk region and the village of Novo Podhoridne. And also it appears that the Ukrainians were able to repel the Russian assault on the Pokrovsk coal mine, but otherwise things do not look good for them in this area. So the TO-406 road is now under complete Russian control going into the city of Pokrovsk. And speaking of which, let's talk about it. And oh my, we got quite the situation. Now, for those who don't know, the Russians have broken through into the city of Pokrovsk, and the Ukrainian defenses here have effectively collapsed. From what I can gather, it seems to me that the armed forces of Ukraine have retreated from here, and as a result, most of the main parts of the city are under their control. Like around 50 to 60% of the city of Pokrovsk is now under Russian control. This includes the commie blocks here, the commie blocks there, the Central Rada building here, the Central Park, and also the railway station. Anatoly Radov has also reported that the Russians were also able to cross the railway station and take these block of houses. And also, other sources across Telegram have also reported that the Russians have taken partial control over this industrial zone here. And if they're able to hold on to this, then pretty much the city of Pokrovsk is dead before it can even breathe a little more. So yeah, it looks like Pokrovsk's days are numbered, and it only makes you wonder what will happen to Myanograd. And speaking of which, the Russians have advanced apparently a little more into the city, but that's about it. And in addition, from the town of Rudensky, the Russians have seized more control over it. I think it's now 50-50 between the Russians and the Ukrainians, with the Russians taking under control many of the commie blocks here, though I still think they have a little bit of ways to go before they're able to do that. But otherwise, I think the town is lost, and the armed forces of Ukraine will not be able to evacuate here safely as they hope they did with Avdiivka. Now, looking at the Dobropila direction. Again, really, guys? But I have to report it because this is Syriac's map. Apparently, the Ukrainians launched a counterattack into the village of Vlodomarivka and have taken around 50% of it back. However, though, the Russians have advanced into the village of Shakove and have taken control over a chunk of it. And then going to the west, the Russians have seized complete control over the village of Nove Shakove, and there's even reports of some fighting in Novi Donbas, which is the last village, by the way, before you enter Dobropila itself. Now, if you ask me, guys, I don't honestly think the Russians are going to be able to really do much in this direction, at least for a while, not until after Myanograd and Pokrovsk fall. And once that does happen, along with Rudensky, the Russians will be able to finally do something about Dobropila. And also, it doesn't help that they don't have this pocket yet under their control. So they have to take these villages here first in order to consolidate their positions in the area, along with increasing further odds of a successful Dobropila operation. In the Konstantinovka direction, not really many changes here, though there is a small advance up to the north, but that's about it. And there's even some reports of Pleshivka being under Russian control, yet Syriac has not painted it just yet. No changes here in the main Konstantinovka direction, not in Chazar Yar, not in Siversk. But in Liman, there are big changes. The Russians, after taking complete control, or recapturing Zarachny and Teresky, they have started their push towards the city of Liman, which the Russians initially controlled during 2022, between around like May and September. And then, as all you guys know by now, the Russians lost control of Liman in the Kharkiv counteroffensive by Ukraine. But now it seems The Russians are aiming to take the city back from the Ukrainians. And they are pushing forward through this forested area here and here. They are advancing also from the northern direction and from the western direction as well. Supposedly, the village of Dobre Shive is contested now, along with large chunks of Novoselivka being under Russian control. In addition, there's even reports of the Russians entering the village of Yarova, but we don't have 100% confirmation of that, which in turn brings them within distance of this strategic town that is a tourist hotspot before the war in Ukraine. And that, my friends, is Pokrovsk. I don't know how to pronounce it in English, that is, or like in proper Slavic. But there's this really nice looking castle here. And apparently it was like a symbol of Ukraine. And for I guess 4 or 5 months or so, the Russians actually had control of it before they lost it too in the Kharkiv counteroffensive. And if they're able to take control or retake control of Sevyatorsk, if they're able to retake control of this village or town here, then they will have no issues re-entering the Kharkiv region from the south. And in turn, they will be within striking distance of the strategic city of Izium. In the Kupiansk direction, not really many changes. The Russians apparently tried to take Pischine, but nothing has worked out. Kupiansk is sort of a stalemate at the moment, but so far the Russians still have the initiative. The Russians are also beginning their offensive to try and recapture the village of Bolohivka, but we don't have any further information at this time regarding the fate of the village, but I assume that it will probably come under Russian control. And in Volchansk, the Russians are fighting it out right now for the commie blocks here within the city of Volchansk. And as far as I know, it looks like the Russians are going to take it, which in turn will end the battle for the town itself. And that's going to do it for today's video. So tell me what you guys think in the comment section below, what you think of the recent news on the ground, and I'll see you all in 3 days. Have a good night, everybody, and I hope you all have a good rest of your week. So take care. Bye-bye.